September 3rd, 1944, 13:52 hours. The Malacca Strait, 60 miles west of the Malay coast. Beneath the surface of the tropical sea, a young British officer peered through the periscope of His Majesty's submarine Tantalus. Michael Tibbs was 22 years old. Most men his age were still learning their trade. Tibbs was about to prove that youth and determination could devastate an entire Japanese convoy in 23 minutes. The Japanese never expected a submarine so young, so aggressive, and so precise. The Imperial Japanese Navy had grown dismissive of British submarines by the autumn of 1944. American boats dominated the headlines, sinking merchant ships across the Pacific at terrifying rates. British submarines, operating from distant Ceylon in waters the Japanese considered secondary, seemed little more than a nuisance. The Malacca Strait, that narrow channel between Sumatra and Malaya, had become a vital supply route. Convoys moved with confidence. Small escorts, a few submarine chasers, perhaps an aircraft overhead. Nothing that suggested real danger. Convoy Semaphore departed Singapore that morning bound for Manila. 6 coastal freighters, each loaded with supplies for the shrinking Japanese garrison in the Philippines. 800 tons each, enough to keep soldiers fed and armed for another month of futile resistance. The convoy commodore calculated his odds. The strait was shallow, barely 150 feet in most places. British submarines, he reasoned, would struggle to operate effectively. Too shallow to dive deep, too narrow to maneuver freely. The escorts would handle any threat. He did not account for His Majesty's submarine Tantalus, and he certainly did not account for the young officer aboard her. Michael Tibbs joined the Royal Navy in November 1940, aged just 18. While Britain stood alone against the Nazi tide, while London burned under the Blitz, Tibbs volunteered for the most dangerous service in the fleet: submarines. 1 in 5 British submariners would never return home. The odds did not deter him. By 1944, after years of training and Mediterranean operations, Tibbs found himself assigned to the 4th Submarine Flotilla in Ceylon. His boat was Tantalus, a T-class submarine fresh from devastating patrols in enemy waters. The T-class represented British submarine design at its finest. 275 feet long, 1,590 tons submerged, 11 torpedo tubes, 8 forward, 3 aft. Enough firepower to cripple a convoy. Enough speed to escape the counterattack. In the hands of a skilled crew, a T-class boat became a weapon of surgical precision. Commander Hugh Sterling Mackenzie commanded Tantalus. 31 years old, holder of the Distinguished Service Order with Bar and the Distinguished Service Cross. Mackenzie had earned his reputation hunting German U-boats and Italian submarines in the Mediterranean. Now he hunted Japanese merchant shipping in the confined waters of Southeast Asia. Under his command, Tantalus had already sent 4 enemy vessels to the bottom, another dozen smaller craft destroyed by gunfire. The crew trusted him completely. Mackenzie trusted his officers, including the 22-year-old watching the periscope that afternoon. Tantalus had been on patrol for 19 days. Long, grueling days in tropical heat. The submarine's interior temperature regularly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Condensation dripped from every surface. The air reeked of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and the chemical toilet. Fresh water was rationed. Hot meals were rare. Sleep came in 4-hour stretches interrupted by alarm drills and depth charge attacks. This was the reality of submarine warfare in the Far East. Endurance mattered as much as courage. The patrol area covered the southern approaches to the Malacca Strait. Intelligence from Ceylon suggested increased Japanese traffic. Merchant ships were abandoning the open sea routes, hugging the coasts where they believed shallow water would protect them from American submarines. British boats, smaller and more maneuverable than their American cousins, specialized in exactly these conditions. Tantalus positioned herself along the main shipping lane, submerged during daylight, surfaced at night to recharge batteries and ventilate the fetid air. September 3rd dawned hot and clear. Tantalus dove at 05:30 hours, settling to periscope depth, 60 feet beneath the surface, just deep enough to avoid detection, shallow enough to observe any passing traffic. The crew settled into the familiar routine. Watchkeepers rotated through the control room. The cook prepared a cold breakfast. Mackenzie studied his charts, planning the day's movements. At 13:52 hours, everything changed. The lookout spotted smoke on the horizon. A sharp call brought Mackenzie to the periscope. He studied the bearing, calculated the distance, then passed the scope to Tibbs. What the young officer saw through that lens would define the next 23 minutes. 6 ships, coastal freighters in line-ahead formation, small vessels by naval standards but valuable targets, between 600 and 800 tons each, loaded deep in the water, which meant full cargo holds. Behind them, 3 submarine chasers in a loose screen. Above them, a Japanese patrol aircraft circling lazily in the afternoon heat. This was Convoy Seamer 4, though Tantalus would not learn that designation until after the war, when Japanese records were recovered. Mackenzie made his decision immediately. Attack. The odds appeared daunting. 6 targets, 3 escorts, aircraft overhead, shallow water with no room for evasive maneuvers. A cautious commander might have shadowed the convoy, waited for better conditions, perhaps attacked after dark when the aircraft had returned to base. Mackenzie was not cautious. He was aggressive, calculating, and supremely confident in his crew. The attack clock started at 13:52 hours. Tantalus altered course to intercept. The submarine moved at periscope depth, using minimal scope exposure to avoid detection. The periscope broke the surface for mere seconds at a time, just long enough to check the target bearing, verify the convoy course, calculate the firing solution, then down again, invisible beneath the waves. This was the art of submarine warfare. Patience combined with precision. One mistake and the counterattack would be devastating. The convoy steamed northeast at 8 knots, not fast, but steady. The freighters maintained good station keeping, each vessel exactly where the Commodore wanted her. The submarine chasers patrolled ahead and on the flanks, their hydrophones listening for the telltale sound of submarine propellers. These were not novice escort crews. The Japanese had learned hard lessons about convoy protection. They maintained active sonar searches. They watched for periscope wakes. They coordinated their movements to cover the convoy's vulnerable sectors. But they were looking for American submarines. Big fleet boats that attacked from deeper water, fired spreads of 6 torpedoes, then dove deep to escape. They were not prepared for British tactics, and they certainly were not prepared for what came next. Tibbs worked the periscope with the precision of a marksman. Each observation refined the attack solution. Target speed, target course, range to the nearest escort, position of the aircraft. All of this information flowed to the attack team in the control room. The torpedo data computer processed the numbers, calculating the precise firing angles needed to intercept the moving targets. In 1944, this was as sophisticated as naval technology could achieve. A mechanical computer, accurate to within yards, operated by men who had trained until the process became instinct. 13:55 hours, range to the convoy, 4,000 yards, too far for a reliable shot. Tantalus crept closer. 1,400 hours, 3,500 yards. Better, but still marginal. The Mark 8 torpedoes carried by British submarines had a maximum range of 7,000 yards, but accuracy dropped dramatically beyond 2,000. Mackenzie wanted certainty. He ordered the approach to continue. 14:05 hours. The submarine chasers altered course. One of them turned directly toward Tantalus. Had they detected something? A periscope glimpse? A sound contact on their hydrophones? The control room fell silent. Every man understood the danger. If the Japanese gained a firm contact, they would attack immediately. Depth charges in these shallow waters would be catastrophic. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. Mackenzie held his course. Nerves of steel or supreme confidence, the result was the same. Tantalus continued. Closing. The submarine chaser passed within 800 yards, close enough that the crew could hear her propellers thrashing through the water overhead, close enough to see her wake through the periscope. But she did not stop. She did not drop depth charges. She had no contact. Pure chance had brought her near. Pure skill kept Tantalus undetected. 14:08 hours, 2,500 yards to the convoy. Perfect firing range. The lead freighter, the largest target, filled the periscope view. Mackenzie gave the order, prepare to fire. The torpedo room crews sprang into action. 4 torpedoes were already loaded in the forward tubes. Mark 8 torpedoes, 21 inches in diameter, 23 feet long, 805 pounds of Torpex explosive in each warhead. Enough to break the back of a merchant ship. The weapons were set to run at 15 feet depth, just beneath the waterline where they would do maximum damage. The crews checked the settings one final time, reported tubes ready, and waited. Tibbs maintained his position at the periscope. This was his shot. Mackenzie had given him the attack. Trust in a 22-year-old officer to execute the most critical moment of the patrol. That trust was not misplaced. 14:10 hours. The aircraft circled overhead, perhaps 1,000 feet up. Could the pilot see the periscope wake? In perfect conditions, maybe, but the afternoon sun was in his eyes, and the sea surface showed the confused pattern of natural wave action. Tantalus remained invisible. The firing solution reached perfection. The lead freighter crossed the calculated intercept point. Tibbs gave the order. Fire 1. The submarine shuddered as compressed air ejected the torpedo from tube 1. The weapon leapt forward, accelerating to 41 knots, stabilizing at 15 feet depth. The propeller wash boiled across the periscope lens for a moment, then cleared. 1 torpedo running. 3 seconds later, fire 2. Another shudder. Another torpedo racing toward the convoy at nearly 50 miles per hour. The attack had begun. There was no turning back now. Mackenzie ordered fire 3. Tibbs pressed the firing button. Nothing happened. The torpedo refused to fire. A mechanical failure, the nightmare of every submarine commander. Tube 3 had developed a fault during the approach. Perhaps a stuck firing valve, perhaps an air pressure problem. Whatever the cause, Torpedo 3 remained stubbornly in place. No time for repairs. No time for diagnosis. Mackenzie made the instant decision. Abort Tube 3, fire Tube 4. The 4th torpedo leapt from the bow. 3 weapons now converging on Convoy, SEMA 4. Running time to the target, approximately 90 seconds. An eternity for the men waiting in Tantalus. Long enough for the Japanese to spot the torpedo tracks. Long enough to evade if they reacted quickly. They did not react quickly enough. 14-12 hours. The first explosion. A massive detonation that echoed through the water like a thunderclap. The hydrophone operator confirmed the hit. 1 target struck amidships. Through the periscope, Tibbs watched the lead freighter stagger. The torpedo had struck perfectly, just beneath the waterline, exactly where the cargo holds were fullest. The explosion tore a hole 20 feet wide in the hull. Seawater poured in at catastrophic rates. 14-13 hours. The second explosion. Another hit, this time on the second ship in the convoy line. The torpedo struck near the stern, probably damaging the engine room. Steam vented from ruptured pipes. The freighter began slewing out of formation, her rudder jammed or her steering gear destroyed. The convoy erupted into chaos. Ships scattered in every direction, abandoning formation to evade the invisible attacker. The submarine chasers raced toward the attack bearing, their crews frantically searching for a target. The aircraft overhead dove lower, scanning the surface for the telltale periscope wake. 14-15 hours, the third explosion. But this one sounded different, shallower, sharper. The third torpedo had struck submarine chaser Chi 1, the nearest escort. The Mark 8 had acquired an unintended target, but the result was equally devastating. The small warship, just 266 tons, stood no chance against 800 pounds of high explosive. Her bow section disintegrated. The vessel began sinking immediately. 3 detonations. 3 hits. 23 minutes from initial sighting to final explosion. A textbook attack executed with clinical precision by a crew that had trained for exactly this moment. But the danger was far from over. The surviving submarine chasers knew the approximate attack position. They raced in at flank speed, their hydrophones now tracking Tantalus clearly. Mackenzie ordered emergency deep. The submarine tilted sharply, plunging toward the seabed. In these shallow waters, deep meant 80 feet, barely enough water to evade a determined depth charge attack. The first pattern of depth charges detonated 60 seconds later. 3 explosions, close enough to throw crewmen off their feet, close enough to shatter light bulbs and crack gauge glass. Not close enough to rupture the pressure hull. Tantalus was built to withstand punishment. The T-class boats had survived depth charge attacks in the Mediterranean that would have destroyed lesser vessels. Mackenzie ordered silent running. Every unnecessary machine was shut down. Men moved in slow motion to avoid creating noise. The submarine crept away at 2 knots, barely faster than a walking pace. Above them, the submarine chasers quartered back and forth, listening for any sound that would betray Tantalus's position. For 40 minutes, the game of cat and mouse continued. The Japanese dropped 14 depth charges. None came as close as the first pattern. The British submarine slowly opened the range, moving south along the seabed, using every trick of submarine warfare to mask her presence. The submarine chasers eventually lost contact. Their hydrophone operators reported negative contact. The convoy, or what remained of it, reformed and continued northeast. The crippled freighters remained behind, struggling to stay afloat. 1600 hours. Mackenzie brought Tantalus back to periscope depth. The convoy was gone. In its place, 2 merchant ships wallowed dead in the water. The lead freighter, later identified as Hachijin Maru, 1,915 gross registered tons, had settled by the bow. Her crew abandoned ship in lifeboats. She would sink before nightfall. The second ship, damaged but still afloat, was taken under tow by a submarine chaser. She would make port, but required months of repairs. The third submarine chaser, Cheya-1, had already disappeared beneath the waves. 3 ships hit, 1 escort sunk, 2 merchants destroyed or crippled. The cargo they carried, supplies, desperately needed by Japanese forces in the Philippines, now rested on the seabed of the Malacca Strait. The strategic impact extended far beyond the tactical results. Every ship sunk meant fewer supplies reaching the front. Every convoy attacked meant more escorts diverted from offensive operations. The cumulative effect of British submarine operations in Southeast Asia was slowly strangling Japanese logistics. Michael Tibbs secured from battle stations. His uniform was soaked with perspiration. His hands shook slightly from the adrenaline, but he had executed a near-perfect attack under the most difficult conditions imaginable. 3 targets hit from 3 torpedoes fired, a 100% hit rate, in shallow water, with escorts present, with aircraft overhead, and with 1 torpedo failure that could have compromised the entire attack. This was British submarine warfare at its finest. Not the mass attacks of American wolf packs in the open Pacific, not the glamorous surface, actions celebrated in newsreels. This was the quiet, deadly work of professional submariners operating in confined waters against a determined enemy. Precision over quantity, skill over firepower, determination over caution. Tantalus withdrew to the south, diving deep as evening approached. That night, surfaced to recharge batteries, Mackenzie composed his patrol report. The action would be recorded in the formal language of naval operations. Enemy convoy intercepted, 3 torpedoes fired, 3 hits observed, 1 merchant vessel confirmed sunk, 2 additional vessels damaged, 1 escort vessel sunk. The patrol report made no mention of the cramped conditions, the tropical heat, the 40-minute depth charge attack, or the skill required to execute the operation successfully. The report also made no special mention of Officer Tibbs. In the Royal Navy tradition, individual heroism was subsumed into the collective achievement of the crew. Tantalus had struck another blow against the plot enemy. The entire ship's company shared the credit. This was how British submariners operated. Quiet professionalism without chest thumping, results without boasting. The patrol continued for another 11 days. Tantalus sank 1 additional small vessel by gunfire and damaged 2 coastal junks before returning to Trincomalee on September 24th. The crew stepped ashore after 30 days submerged, sunburnt, exhausted, and victorious. Mackenzie submitted his patrol report. Intelligence officers correlated the action with Japanese convoy records. The sinking of Hachijin Maru was confirmed. The damage to submarine chaser Chart 1 was confirmed. The attack on convoy Sima 4 was officially recognized as a successful operation. Michael Tibbs received no individual decoration for the action. He was not promoted. He did not give interviews to war correspondents. His role in the attack remained known only to his shipmates. This was perfectly normal. Junior officers in the Royal Navy earned recognition through cumulative service, not single actions. Tibbs would continue serving aboard Tantalus for another 9 months, participating in what became the longest patrols of the war. 52-day patrols, 55-day patrols, operations that tested human endurance to the breaking point. By victory over Japan Day, In August 1945, Tibbs had been promoted to first lieutenant. He had survived the war. Many of his fellow submariners had not. The Royal Navy Submarine Service suffered the highest casualty rate of any British military branch. 1 in 5 submariners killed. 73 British submarines lost. More than 3,000 men dead. Tantalus survived, her crew survived, and they had played their part in strangling Japanese logistics across Southeast Asia. The September 3rd action exemplified everything that made British submarine operations in the Far East successful. Aggressive tactics in confined waters, precise attacks with limited weapons, professional competence under extreme pressure, and the willingness to trust young officers with enormous responsibility. The Japanese never understood why British submarines proved so effective in the Malacca Strait. They expected American-style mass attacks. They prepared for long-range torpedo spreads from deep water. They did not anticipate the patient, methodical approach of boats like Tantalus. British submarines operated closer to the coast, in shallower water, accepting greater risk for better firing positions. They used fewer torpedoes but achieved higher hit rates. They adapted their tactics to the environment rather than forcing the environment to match their doctrine. By early 1945, Japanese merchant traffic through the Malacca Strait had virtually ceased. Large vessels no longer made the passage. Convoys were reduced to coastal junks hugging the shoreline. The strait had become too dangerous. British submarines owned those waters. Tantalus and her sister boats had achieved their strategic objective. The sea lanes were cut. Japanese forces in Southeast Asia were isolated. The slow strangulation of the enemy supply line was complete. The cost was measured in human endurance. Submarine patrols in tropical waters tested men beyond normal limits. Heat exhaustion was common. Skin diseases flourished in the humid conditions. Psychological stress from depth charge attacks accumulated over time. Fresh food was a distant memory. Sleep was fitful and insufficient. Every patrol shaved a few more pounds off the crew, left them a bit more hollow-eyed, a bit more gaunt, but they continued, patrol after patrol, month after month, because the job required it, because their mates depended on it, because Britain expected it. Michael Tibbs would later recall the September 3rd action in interviews conducted decades after the war. By then, he could speak freely about operations that had been classified for years. His account matched the Problicht Isene patrol reports perfectly. 3 torpedoes fired, 3 hits, 1 sunk, the failed 4th torpedo, the depth charge attack, the narrow escape. He described it all with characteristic British understatement. Just another day's work, nothing special. Any trained crew would have done the same. But the Japanese survivors of Hachijin Maru told a different story. In post-war interviews, they described the shock of the torpedo explosion, the chaos as the ship began flooding, the desperate scramble for lifeboats. They never saw the submarine. They never knew what hit them. One moment they were steaming confidently through waters they believed safe. The next moment their ship was sinking beneath them. That was the reality of submarine warfare. Invisible, deadly, unavoidable. The submarine chasers reported their frustration in patrol logs recovered after the war. They had searched for hours, dropped 14 depth charges, achieved no confirmed kill. The submarine had simply vanished. Japanese anti-submarine doctrine emphasized aggressive counterattacks. The doctrine assumed that aggressive action would eventually destroy the attacker. But against boats like Tantalus, commanded by men like Mackenzie, crewed by sailors like Tibbs, aggression was not enough. The British were simply better at this kind of warfare. This was not arrogance. This was not national chauvinism. This was the result of years of experience accumulated in the Mediterranean, where British submarines had hunted in some of the most dangerous waters of the war. Italian anti-submarine forces were formidable. German escorts were ruthless. The Mediterranean taught British submariners to be patient, to be precise, to make every torpedo count. Those lessons transferred perfectly to the Far East. The September 3rd action represented 23 minutes of combat. But those 23 minutes were built on years of training, thousands of hours at sea, dozens of practice attacks, countless drills until every man could perform his duties blindfolded. This was the foundation of British submarine success. Not luck, not superior equipment, not numerical advantage. Professional competence refined through relentless preparation. 22-year-old Michael Tibbs embodied that competence. He had joined the Navy at 18 with no special connections, No family tradition of service, just a willingness to volunteer for the most dangerous duty available. 4 years later, he stood at the periscope of one of His Majesty's submarines and executed a near-perfect attack against overwhelming odds. He did this because he was trained to do it, because his commander trusted him to do it, because his crew depended on him to do it. That was British submarine warfare in 1944, not glory-seeking, not medal hunting, just young men doing extraordinarily difficult jobs with quiet competence and understated courage. The September 3rd action lasted 23 minutes. The memory lasted a lifetime. The impact lasted until Japan surrendered 11 months later, their supply lines severed, their merchant fleet destroyed, their forces isolated and starving. Commander Mackenzie would later receive the Distinguished Service Order, with Barr for his cumulative achievements commanding Tantalus. The entire crew shared in the recognition. Submarine warfare was a team effort. The periscope officer could not succeed without the torpedo crew. The torpedo crew could not succeed without the engineers maintaining the boat. The engineers could not succeed without the hydrophone operators detecting threats. Every man was essential. Every man contributed. Michael Tibbs continued serving in the Royal Navy after the war ended. He participated in the post-war drawdown of forces, the reduction of the submarine fleet, the return to peacetime routines. He eventually left active service but maintained his connection to the submarine community. In his 90s, nearly 8 decades after the Capeley's September 3rd attack, he gave interviews to historians documenting British submarine operations. His memory of that afternoon in the Malacca Strait remained crystal clear. The tactical details, the torpedo failure, the depth charge attack, the satisfaction of seeing 3 hits from 3 torpedoes. He never boasted. He never claimed individual credit. He simply described what happened. A British submarine crew did their duty. They struck the enemy. They survived. They came home. That was the story. That was always the story. The Japanese never expected a 22-year-old to demonstrate such lethal competence. They never expected British submarines to operate with such precision in shallow, confined waters. They never expected 3 torpedoes to achieve 3 hits against a defended convoy in broad daylight. Their assumptions cost them Hachijin Maru, submarine chaser Chi-1, and 2 damaged merchant vessels. More importantly, their assumptions cost them control of the Malacca Strait. September 3rd, 1944, 23 minutes, 3 torpedoes, 3 hits. One very young British officer, proving that age matters far less than training, courage, and determination. The Japanese learned that lesson too late.